Got to bring in Fox NBA analyst Slick Ric Bucher in on this. But I'll tell you, you have an issue with Ray Allen's reasoning on why LeBron is not the GOAT.
I love this conversation. I cannot wait to hear all of you all's opinions. I have a huge issue with it, and I like Ray Allen. Good dude, met him a few times, great person. I have an issue with it, though, because his logic is flawed. Let's talk about Michael Jordan, who then, if LeBron is not the GOAT, is the GOAT. Michael Jordan wasn't the greatest dunker of his era. I'd say Dr. J. Wasn't the greatest shooter of his era. I'd say Larry Bird. Wasn't the greatest shot blocker of his era. I'd say Mutombo. Wasn't the greatest dribbler of his era. You could say Isaiah Thomas. Wasn't the greatest rebounder of his era. You could say Akeem. So Jordan was not the greatest as anything that you could quantify. What Jordan was the greatest at was non-quantifiable. He was the most clutch. He had the greatest killer instinct. LeBron James, I don't think he's the greatest shooter of this generation. I would say Steph Curry, not the greatest dribbler of this generation or finisher. You could argue Kyrie Irving for both. Not the greatest rebounder of the generation. You could argue any of the bigs. You could argue somebody from Giannis. You could argue any other big player. It's not LeBron James, but what is LeBron James' greatest at? Something you cannot quantify: basketball IQ. The only time Ray Allen's argument works, and can I see my intellectual dogs? We know what LeBron James highlights look like. I don't need to see him. Anybody. Let me look at my intellectual brethren,
Look great to me.
The only time, Stel, I think this argument works is in individual sports. The only time you can say you have to be greatest at something to be the greatest overall is in an individual sport. In track and field, Usain Bolt was the greatest finisher. Not the greatest starter by any means, but was the greatest finisher. In tennis, Serena Williams has the most power. In individual sports, you can argue that you have to be the greatest at something to be the greatest. Why, Slick? I spent so much time thinking about the nuance. Because in team sports, it's other people around you that make you great. LeBron James could not have the highest basketball IQ without other players to prove his IQ, without being able to distribute to the right person in the right moment. Michael Jordan needed Karl Malone Game 6, 1998 to prove how clutch he was because he needed to steal the ball, go down the court, cross over Byron Russell to prove how clutch he was. You can't prove you're clutch playing a game by yourself. Can't prove you have a high basketball IQ playing a game by yourself. So Ray Allen's logic is flawed when it comes to team sports. You do not have to be the greatest at anything individually to be the greatest of all time because Jordan wasn't and Bron isn't.
I hate the questions, and I have issue with the questions that Ray Allen asked. But I understand the point that he was trying to make, and I think it's an interesting one, because what he's suggesting is, how can you be the greatest of all time if you didn't dominate in any one particular thing at any particular time? And I'm going to push back with you on the Michael Jordan comparison. He demonstrated that he was the greatest during his time as a scorer. 10 consecutive scoring titles when he played a complete season, 7 in a row before he took a year and a half off. So, and while he was doing that, he was also first team all defense and first team all NBA all of those years. So the case can be made that he made a very strong argument that for a decade, Michael Jordan was the best two-way player in the game. That is his claim to fame. And this is what I found interesting in sort of researching this topic, which is LeBron James is about to enter his 20th season. He has 1 assist title and 1 scoring title to his name. Those are the only 2 things that he has done in any one season where he dominated a particular statistical category. Now, if we want to dismiss the statistics, I'm okay with that. We can just go by the eye test, or we can go by championships won, or we can go by other measurements. But if we do that, that then eliminates all of the arguments for why LeBron James is potentially better than Michael Jordan or a number of other guys. We can't pick and choose when it comes to statistics. So it's why I understand what Ray Allen was getting at. I just don't like that he, first of all, he mixed free throw shooting with dribbling, and okay, are we measuring that on percentages? It's a flawed way to approach the topic. But the idea that LeBron James never demonstrated dominance in any one particular area of the game and how that might undermine the argument to suggest that he could be the greatest of all time, I think is a fair argument to make.
I don't think it was a fair argument to make, and I think he had great intentions. I think they were pure intentions. He was trying to break down all the components of what makes the GOAT, and he wanted to reverse engineer this. And we all know, when you get in your car and you go in reverse, you just don't see things as clearly as when you're going forward, right? So now trying to reverse engineer this, you're like, oh, he's supposed to be the GOAT? Well, can he do this? Can he do this? And can he do this? Well, let's talk about who could do that. And let's see if they could be the GOAT, since this is supposed to be the argument. Let's talk about those free throws, right? So we're going to put what? Steph Curry, Steve Nash, Mark Price. Those are the guys who shot the best at the free throw line. Are they the GOAT? Uh-oh, here we go. No, it's the three-point shooters. Okay, so we got Steve Kerr. What we got? Hubert Davis. Steph Curry again. Uh-oh, 2 categories for Steph Curry. He must be the GOAT. We're not going to say that. Oh, it's those dribblers, man. You got to be able to dribble at least. So Tim Hardaway, Sr., and AI, all tremendous, all different tiers and levels of greatness, but none of those guys in the GOAT conversation. So trying to go backwards with this and reverse engineers, he actually ran into all the problems. To build up LeBron James, Acho says this so well. I don't know why he didn't say it this time. It's not just the peak powers of what LeBron James possesses. It's how consistent he does them and how long he's been doing this. And LeBron James is the greatest of making others great around him. So you add all those attributes up, and now you may have a conversation of why he is the GOAT. But looking at him telling some 15-year-olds, leaning in on them, get off my lawn, you don't know what a GOAT looks like, didn't really come across with the best ammunition, even though I think he had the best intention.
Well, let's also give Ray Allen a pass. He's asked a question in passing, and he has to come up with some reasoning as to why he believes what he does. It's not as if he had a chance to prep for a show, okay? So I'm going to give a little bit of an out there, right?
Facts.
But here's the thing. I believe, Marcellus, that he was not looking that in context of you have to be great in those categories, but in the guys that are in the conversation of being great, how does LeBron measure up to those other greats in those categories? And I would say one of the reasons why Shaquille O'Neal is not as high on my list as he might be with others is because you could play hack-a-Shaq. You had to take him off the floor in the last 2 minutes because the free throw shooting was such a flaw. Wilt Chamberlain gets dinged for the same reason. People question Bill Russell's place among the all-time greats because he wasn't the scorer that we see among the all-time greats that he's compared to or that he's in the conversation with. But here's the other element, and I'm surprised that we never talk about this, which is, and again, researching this topic, it kind of jumped out at me. Do you know who the all-time leader in turnovers in the league is? It's LeBron James, and it's by a lot. By the time he's done, he may put that number in a place where nobody is ever going to touch it. And he's not. And you're going to say, yeah, but he's got the ball a lot. And he's a great passer and all that. He's 7th on the all-time list in assist. And yes, he may move up a couple rungs, but he ain't moving up to number 1. So again, here's my whole case with this. The case that I hear for LeBron James and where he stands among the all-time greats is always invariably a statistical one. And whether it's consistency, it's longevity, whatever it is. And I think what Ray is pointing to, which I think is a fair thing to point to, is, okay, is it a longevity award? Are your numbers impressive because of how long you've been doing it for how many consecutive years? And does that qualify as greatness if at any point you weren't looked at saying that you dominated the game?
Unfair, man. I'm not with Ray Allen on this one. I'm not trying to sit here and disparage him, but at the same time, even in passing, Ray Allen's supposed to know more than he's supposed to forget more than I know, right? He's supposed to be prepared for this argument. You play with LeBron. You should be able to say this. As I read it, you should be able to say this without reading it. Only player in NBA history to be top 5 all-time in points, top 10 all-time in assists, top 10 all-time in steals. So we're talking both sides of the court. You're supposed to be able to say that. You're not supposed to get lost in the sauce and just tell 15-year-olds he can't be the GOAT because he can't shoot free throws or something, which is crazy because the only 3 players that I ever hear, it seems like in commonality of the GOAT conversation, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It seems like I always hear those 3. We don't look at Kareem and say, oh, well, he could shoot free throws, but he couldn't shoot the 3 and he couldn't dribble. Like, how do we start to slice this? And I just think that Ray Allen is smart enough to know how to handle the knife. He's smart enough to know how to slice it, at least better than he did in front of those little kids.